At the base of one of Rome's largest temples is a foundation that doesn't make sense. 3 stone blocks, each weighing 800 tons, set 7 meters above the ground. This site holds one of the most baffling engineering mysteries in ancient history, and the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Michael. I have a degree in ancient history, and on this channel, we discuss the unexplainable mysteries of our past. Let's get into it. Today we're starting in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, at a site that's been continuously inhabited and puzzled over for thousands of years. This is Baalbek. Archaeological evidence shows people have been living here since at least the Neolithic, over 8,000 years ago. So this place has deep roots. The Phoenicians worshipped Baal here, god of storms and fertility. The Greeks renamed it Heliopolis, city of the sun, and dedicated it to solar worship. Then the Romans arrived, and they constructed one of the largest temple complexes in their entire empire, dedicated to Jupiter. But now things get intriguing. At the base of the temple is something called the Trilithon, 3 massive limestone blocks, each weighing around 800 tons. To put that in perspective, that's heavier than 100 African elephants. And just uphill from the temple, there are 3 stones even larger than that. But we'll come back to those in just a sec, because here's what makes this site so strange. The Romans were obsessive about documenting stuff. They inscribed everything: building projects, military campaigns, tax records. They left a paper trail across their entire empire. Even private citizens, building small roadside shrines, carved their names and contributions into the stone. The Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek used some of the heaviest stones ever quarried in the Roman world. But there's not a single inscription naming who commissioned it. No record of when the construction began. No cost ledger. No appointed official taking credit for overseeing it. Ancient writers described other Roman engineering marvels in exhaustive detail, but when they wrote about Baalbek, they never mentioned the foundation stones. How do you miss the biggest blocks ever moved in the ancient world? So let's back up and ask the question, what were the Romans actually capable of? Because Roman engineering was legendary. They built the Colosseum, the Pantheon, aqueducts that still carry water today, entire cities that reshaped the ancient world. But we also know their limits. The most powerful Roman crane, the Spastos, could lift around 6 tons with just 2 men. Scale that up with tread wheels, more workers and animal power, and you reach about 60 tons. Now 60 tons is a lot, but at Baalbek itself, the temple stones weigh about that, which makes sense. However, the Trilithon blocks are over 10 times what those cranes could handle. So all of a sudden, things get puzzling. The mainstream view is that the Trilithon was placed during the Roman period, somewhere between the 1st century BC and the 3rd century AD, as part of the construction of the Temple of Jupiter. It's believed they used capstans, wooden rollers, and earthen ramps. In fact, in 1977, French archaeologist Jean-Pierre Adam published a detailed engineering study showing that Roman-era methods could, in principle, handle even the largest blocks at Baalbek. Using teams of men operating multiple 6-bar capstans, with around 500 workers providing a combined pull of roughly 550 tons, he says they could have moved an 800-ton block the short distance from quarry to temple. So, case closed, right? The Romans built the Temple of Jupiter. They needed a monumental foundation. They had the engineering knowledge. So they moved the stones, right? Well, not necessarily, because all is not as it seems. You know, as I've been building this channel, life has just ramped up. Travel, video deadlines, family. My body takes a hit just keeping up with all of that. That's why I've been using AG1 Next Gen, and honestly, it's one of the easiest habits I've added to my day. AG1 Next Gen is the daily health drink that rolls your multivitamin, pre- and probiotics, superfoods, and antioxidants all into one simple scoop. You just mix 1 scoop or a travel pack into your AG1 shaker with about 8 to 12 ounces of cold water. Give it a shake and that's it. I've been taking it every morning before diving into work, and it's become part of the routine. It helps support my gut health, keeps my natural energy steady through long editing sessions, and it supports the body's natural defenses, which, let's be honest, we could all use when life gets hectic. And right now you can try it for yourself. Head to drinkag1.com/MichaelButton or scan the QR code on screen to get your free welcome kit. You'll get a bottle of vitamin D3 and K2, a shaker bottle, and sample packs of all 3 new AG1 flavors. Thanks to today's sponsor AG1, and you can find the link in the description below. Now let's get back to the video. The conventional explanation, as neat as it sounds, leaves some pretty big questions unanswered, questions that mainstream archaeology itself acknowledges, but hasn't fully resolved. Each Trilithon block is roughly 19 meters long, longer than a school bus, and they aren't lying on the ground. They're stacked, resting on earlier layers. Somehow, someone lifted and aligned them without cranes, steel, or modern surveying tools. One wrong move and you'd crush everything beneath it. There are no visible Lewis holes, a famous Roman method for lifting stones. That's how they used the palispastos crane. They drilled holes into the blocks, inserted metal clamps, and hoisted them, and the temple stones right above the Trilithon are covered in Lewis holes. Yet the Trilithon itself doesn't show anything. And things get even more interesting when we look at those bigger stones that I mentioned earlier. Just 800 meters uphill from the temple is the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, which weighs around 1,000 tons. And this one is called the Stone of the South, which weighs 1,242 tons. And finally, there's the Forgotten Stone. At 1,650 tons, it's the largest work stone ever found anywhere on Earth. They're half buried, partially freed from bedrock, clearly prepared for transport, but they never moved. Now that raises an obvious question. If these stones were ready to go, then how were they planning to move them? The quarry sits 4.27 meters above the temple base. That's just a 0.3 degree slope, barely noticeable, but enough to create natural downhill momentum. So if the builders had used a ramp in winter, on ice, gravity alone could carry the huge block downhill fairly comfortably. And we know that moving massive stones on ice is possible. In 1768, the Russians moved the Thunderstone, a 1,500-ton boulder 6 kilometers across frozen ground using only 400 men. Thus, it's a compelling theory, and the positioning of the Baalbek stones suggests they thought it through. But something stopped them. Because when you actually look at the Trilithon blocks up close, then you notice something odd. The stones show deep erosion, the kind of weathering damage that takes thousands of years to accumulate. But the Roman structures built directly on top of them, well, they're still crisp, which could suggest the foundation is far older than the temple above it. The construction philosophy is completely different too. Yes, the Romans could move heavy stones. We know they placed 60-ton architraves higher up at Baalbek itself, but 800-ton blocks? That's more than 10 times heavier, and it's not a technique we see them use anywhere else in their empire. And as you move up the structure, the craftsmanship actually gets worse. The base is finally finished, but the Roman layers above it are rougher and less precise. That's the opposite of what you'd expect if they built the whole thing from the ground up. Even the layout of the temple feels off. The platform underneath doesn't align cleanly with the Roman architecture. It almost looks like the Romans found a foundation and built around it, instead of designing it all as one structure. Then there's the archaeological data. Pottery fragments found at the quarry date to the Persian period, in the 6th to the 4th centuries BC. That's hundreds of years before Rome ever conquered the region, which means someone was already active here, long before the Romans arrived. Even 19th century scholars noticed that something wasn't adding up. French archaeologist Ernest Renan called the base, quote, very possibly pre-Roman. His contemporary, Louis de Saulcy, believed the podium belonged to an earlier temple entirely. Thus, so far, we found no inscriptions, no tools, and no matching examples anywhere else in the Roman world. Just the stones themselves, impossibly large, placed with precision, and showing erosion patterns that don't match the structures above them. But if the Romans didn't build it, then who did? Well, whatever stood here before them, it doesn't seem to fit neatly into our standard accepted timeline. Which is why modern engineers still scratch their heads about all this. Even with everything we now know, with satellites, 3D modeling, and cranes that can lift 3,000 tons, we, in our modern age, could theoretically move these stones, but it would be a huge challenge. The terrain is unsuitable, the logistics would be a nightmare, and the cost would be astronomical. For context, in 2018, engineers in Egypt moved a 90-ton statue of Ramesses II just 400 meters through Cairo. But it took 2 custom-built trailers, weeks of planning, reinforced roads, and a convoy of support vehicles. The whole operation cost millions and made international news, and that's just 90 tons. Now imagine with blocks as big as the Trilithon. Modern experiments haven't helped either. When researchers tried moving replica megaliths using traditional ancient methods, sledges slipped, rollers jammed, and the stones veered off course. And that was with far smaller test blocks, under controlled conditions with modern safety equipment standing nearby. But there is one piece of evidence that mainstream archaeologists often point to. A Roman column drum was found beneath one of the Trilithon stones during excavations, and some argue this proves the Romans placed them. Except a closer look could suggest otherwise. The Romans were building a massive temple complex above, columns, capitals, architraves, all pressing down on the foundation. Over time, that added stress would have been enormous. At some point, part of the foundation likely sagged or cracked under the weight. So perhaps they simply patched it up. The easiest fix would be to use whatever was nearby, in this case a spare column drum. Not ideal, but functional. But if the Roman engineers had placed those original Trilithon blocks and noticed one had failed, what would they have done? Surely they'd have removed the upper layers, replaced the damaged stone with a proper foundation block, and rebuilt it from the ground up. That's how master engineers work. Instead, what we see looks like a shortcut, a makeshift prop, not precision foundation work, just maintenance. In my view, the column drum doesn't really prove Roman construction. Instead, it might be evidence of the Romans doing quick repairs on someone else's work. But that raises a huge question. Who is that someone else? Baalbek may have been a sacred site long before the Romans arrived, and it's possible they simply built on top of existing megalithic foundations. I mean, that's common practice in the ancient world, but who then would this previous culture have been? There's no confirmed archaeological evidence of a prior civilization in the region known to have engineered megaliths on that scale before the Romans. But there's another theory, one that pushes the timeline much further back. Around 11,000 to 13,000 years ago, geological evidence points to a dramatic global change. Ice sheets collapsed, sea levels rose by up to 65 feet in just 500 years, enormous glacial lakes burst, flooding entire continents. During the Younger Dryas climate event, temperatures plummeted back to near glacial conditions in less than a century, before abruptly warming again. This period saw the extinction of most large mammal species. Woolly mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, all gone. If Baalbek's megaliths date to this era, they'd be contemporary with Göbekli Tepe, the oldest known temple on Earth. And that's a connection worth considering. Göbekli Tepe is around 12,000 years old, and it proves something extraordinary. Because we now know that the people of that time, traditionally thought to be just hunter-gatherers, had the organisational capacity for massive stone construction. The site uses these huge T-shaped pillars, some weighing over 50 tons, and transported from nearby quarries. And it's not just Göbekli Tepe. Much closer to Baalbek, you've also got the Hermel Pyramid, built on 2 limestone blocks weighing 40 to 50 tons each. No entrance has ever been found. So if the same culture or some connected descendant groups reached the Birka Valley, they may have started construction at Baalbek. And that might explain why the stones lay moved and unfinished, because something terrible stopped them. This is of course speculation, but if a lost culture somehow did really build this, then it means ancient humans had far more knowledge and capabilities than we've ever given them credit for. They may have had the ability to coordinate hundreds, maybe thousands of people to quarry, transport and position stones that weigh more than most modern buildings. It would rewrite our understanding of prehistoric engineering, social organisation and technology across thousands of years. So at minimum, Baalbek is an unsolved engineering feat that challenges our assumptions about what early ancient civilizations could achieve. Or alternatively, it could be a missing chapter in the human story, one that changes our entire timeline and shows that societal and engineering sophistication is much older, goes back much further in time than we had ever imagined. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like or leaving a comment down below or subscribing to my channel. See you next time.